Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and Tebow.
It wasn't perfect. It was not always conventional, but the Cardinals put together a 500 week of baseball since the last time that we spoke. Alongside Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got the Redbird Report. Appreciate you tuning in as always. Cardinals 3-3 since we last spoke on Thursday, T-Bone. In that stretch, we saw more Jordan Walker greatness. We saw J.J. Weatherholtz with a 2-home-run game. We saw a nice Dustin May performance. Riley O'Brien has been spectacular. There's been a lot of news, notes, anything you want to get into here for the Cardinals. Let's just start kind of big picture. What have you learned about the Cardinals in the last week?
Well, they stuck with their mindset that they wanted to have coming into the year, which is that they were going to be a scrappy baseball team. We mentioned all these successful storylines, and yet you look at if you watch the games, it doesn't feel like they've had that much success, even though they're 500, right? Because the bullpen blows up a lot, or the rotation starter doesn't get deep, or the lineup for a minute they're one guy hitting and it was Jordan Walker, and then some of the bats started to wake up during that Guardians series. But the reason I bring up they're just scrappy and they're doing all the things on the margins which they wanted to do coming into the year is that's how they're winning these baseball games. You look at that last game against Cleveland yesterday, it was a lot of taking an extra base, stealing a base so you could get someone into scoring position, and then having to come through with the one big hit, the single from Burleson that drives in too late in that game. Weatherholt has an RBI sac fly. They're doing the small things, which they have to do because they don't have the talent to just kind of blow you away. But they are sticking to what they said coming into the year, which is we're going to be this gritty team. We're going to take the extra bases. We're not going to make mistakes on the base paths. And they are sticking to that. Now, does that mean they're going to have success moving forward? Odds are no. They just don't have the dudes. But it's what's keeping them and making this interesting here through the first month or so of the baseball season.
I would say so far they look like an average baseball team, and their record is that of an average baseball team. Now, in the current National League, that's good enough to be right in the playoff mix because nobody has really stepped in front of their competition outside of the Dodgers. The Dodgers are unbelievable. Who could have seen that coming? When you sign Kyle Tucker and Edwin Diaz to the already best team in the league, it's going to look pretty good. But it has been interesting to me how they've done it. Ivan Herrera, not hitting for average yet, not hitting for power yet, but he's walking at an almost unprecedented level for a St. Louis Cardinal. He has the most walks by a Cardinal at this point in the season since Albert Pujols in 2006. He has 18 walks in 18 games. That's crazy. A lot of that, I would imagine, is because he was further down in the lineup with no protection previously. We'll see if he's able to translate that soon into more hits now that he's up in the order. Jordan Walker, this crazy start to the season. Again, you look at guys that are in the conversation for this kind of a start, it's Albert Pujols, basically. But then you just have a lot of there's all of this stuff going on, right? Mason went off to a slow start. Victor Scott hasn't really gotten going offensively. Nolan Gorman hasn't done much of anything on the offensive side of the ball. The first two starts for Dustin May were awful, so incredibly bad. The bullpen could not stop peeing down its own leg to save its own life. It's all of this stuff, and then you look at it and you're like, yeah, they're average. They're average. It's why I think it feels weird as you're watching it, where you're like, man, I don't know if this is good, bad, somewhere in between. And that's because that's how it's supposed to feel. When you end up right around this record at this point in the season, it should feel very uneven. Otherwise, they'd be doing a lot more of the winning thing, and they haven't been able to do that thus far. But I'm glad you mentioned the winning on the margins, because to me, that's really been the story of the season thus far. The Cardinals don't do a lot of the big things super well. They don't strike out opposing hitters. Their pitching just doesn't get strikeouts. As an offense, they're not very good at slugging the ball outside of basically Jordan Walker. They don't hit many doubles, which is something I think they should do.
Prior to that Guardian series, because I'd looked this up when Alex and I were doing the BK and Ferrario show on Monday, you had Walker doing his thing, and I think the rest of the team, if I remember correctly, was slugging 303. It was abysmal.
The Cardinals as a team are 27th in Major League Baseball in doubles this year. I understand you're not going to have the home run power. We all knew that coming into the season, right? But you should be a team that can hit a bunch of doubles. Like, that should be Ivan Herrera's game. That should be Mason Wynn's game. That should be Alec Burleson's game. That should even be like Victor Scott and JJ Weatherhold's game.
When I was going to say Scott because of his speed, right? He should be able to turn what should be a single into a double.
So I would think that's coming eventually. I have my fingers crossed that that's coming eventually, but so far it hasn't happened for them. So they have to win on the margins. They've got to be good at the little things. And so far this year, you can at least make an argument they're the best team in baseball at that. So we mentioned this on BK and Ferrario, and I want to get into this a little bit more with you here, T-Bone. The Cardinals are number 1 in Major League Baseball in bases taken this season. Now, that's a seemingly random, innocuous stat, but it's basically taking bases on fly balls, pass balls, wild pitches, that kind of stuff. So an opportunity to go the extra 90 feet, do you take it or not when the other team is giving it to you? For the Cardinals, they always take it. Number 1 in Major League Baseball in that regard. In fact, they have taken 34 bases this year. That stat that I just referenced. Second in all of Major League Baseball is the Cincinnati Reds. They're at 22. So the gap is 12 bases taken between number 1 and number 2 in Major League Baseball. For context, that is the same as the gap between the Reds, who are second in Major League Baseball, and the Padres, who are 27th in Major League Baseball in bases taken so far this year. So the Cardinals aren't just doing this thing well. They're doing it better than anybody else by a significant margin. And then you add in the productive outs. They have 26 of them so far this year. So a runner on third, less than 2 outs, you find a way to get them home. That would be a productive out, right? Same thing for a guy on second. Runner on second, 1 out or fewer, you get him over to third. You're moving the runner over, and then you're getting him in. Cardinals are better than anybody in the league at doing that so far this year. They're also top 5 in Major League Baseball, no surprise here, with scoring that runner from third with fewer than 2 outs. So these are all little things, right? They're bunting runners over. They're bunting for singles. They're doing small ball at a really high level. And when you do all of these little things, they add up over time, especially if you're also doing the big things. It should be no surprise then that last year, the teams that were the best at this were almost exclusively playoff teams. It was the Dodgers. It was the Phillies. It was the Mets. It was the Yankees. It was the Guardians. Those teams were really good at these small things. The reason why I bring this up, T-Bone, and why I think it's so important that they're still doing these, even in the midst of a rebuild, is because it reflects a well-coached roster. And whenever it is that the Cardinals get back to being good again, whether that's this year, next year, or sometime beyond, they're going to have to do this stuff well. So it's good to have this foundation in place for whenever it is that they start hitting home runs again. And whenever it is that they start getting swing and miss pitching again, to be able to take advantage of those little things, because then winning on the margins doesn't just take you from a team that's supposed to win 75 that gets to 80. Now you're a team that was supposed to win 90 and you're able to get yourself to 95. And instead of being a wild card team, you're winning the division, right? Like those are the moments when this stuff really starts to matter. But I like seeing that they're doing this even when the stakes are a little bit lower, and it would be easier to get away from some of this stuff as a player.
Yeah, exactly. And I know like this comment's going to sound weird because of the state that they're in, but it's almost like a winning culture, right? Because a winning culture would do the small things on the margin, and it would hold guys accountable for when they're not doing like running hard to first base or, running, getting the ground ball to the right side so you make sure you get that runner over, or executing on a sacrifice bunt. Like you said, all the winning team or all the playoff teams for the most part from last year were near the top of this. So it is a good sign that they are sticking to this, and Ali Marmol and the coaching staff have been able to kind of solidify this to these guys, even though, hey, there were no expectations for us coming into the year. We're not going to accept the fundamentals to kind of start to dissipate from our game. And I also feel like they're a decent job of kind of preventing some of those extra bases. And what I mean by that is the one we saw from the Cleveland game yesterday, where Scott on a bases-loaded fly ball from Weatherholt tags at first base, and he then takes second base, not because his speed allowed him to take second base, but because the throw was off target, which then allowed him to advance. They seem to throw to the right spot on the bases for the most part this year as well. And those little things don't matter as much now, but to your point, they're going to matter a lot whenever they're ready to exit this rebuild, because it just continues to put pressure on teams, right? And I know it seems like a small thing, But I love the way that Derek had kind of said this about the Cardinals offense as a whole, but it kind of ties into this. If you can find a way to get that guy over to second because of a small mistake, like a fly ball to the outfield and they don't throw it in quick enough, or same like fly ball to center and you're able to tag up from second and get to third with nobody out, so now there's one out runner at third, it just increases the probabilities of how you can get that guy home, right? There's more avenues to how you can score. You don't think a pitcher's more panicked when there's a runner at second compared to at first base, and you were able to somehow get him over there because of whether it be a sacrifice bunt or a ground out that allowed him to get there? Well, guess what? Now he's got a fear. Not only is there a runner in scoring position, is this guy relaying signs behind me right now? So it's all those small things that start to add up, and then once you do get those big boppers finally in the middle of this lineup, these habits start today. You don't just suddenly flip a switch and, you know what, we're going to be good at this taking extra bases. No. That starts today, starts in spring training, and they've been able to continue that.
The other thing is it buys you time. The Cardinals' offense right now is not very good. They have Jordan Walker, who's been amazing, but by and large, the offense has not been great so far this season. The underlying numbers, though, suggest that should change at some point. The Cardinals' actual batting average as a team so far is .231. The expected numbers based upon their batted ball metrics is .241. It's a 10-point difference. That's significant at this point in the season. Slugging percentage-wise, the Cardinals as a team, .369 so far this year. That's not very good. But if you look at the expected slugging percentage numbers, that's closer to .415, which is top 7 in Major League Baseball. So by the expected numbers, they're much higher than what their actual numbers are so far this season. A big part of that is because Ivan Herrera has been extremely unlucky with his batted ball metrics so far this season. That doesn't mean it will continue that way. It's possible that the batted ball metrics decline. They end up not hitting for as much power later on, and so the actual numbers never meet what the expected numbers were at the beginning of the season. But if they continue performing the way that they have thus far, you'd expect some positive regression for the Cardinals as things continue. And that's the kind of thing that I want to talk about on the other side. I want to play a game with you of better, worse, or the same. I'm going to give you a bunch of different metrics on where the Cardinals are at right now. I'm curious, do you think after the first 18 games of the season, do you think this will get better? Will it get worse? Or will it stay the same through 162? We'll get into that coming up on the other side here on the Redbird Report. All right, T-Bone, I want to play a game with you. Not like what they do in Saw, but like what we do here on the Redbird Report.
A little worried there for a minute.
It's a game called Better, Worse, or the Same. And it's going to be very simple. I'm going to read you some stuff. You tell me if you think this gets better, worse, or the same as the season progresses from where we're at right now. Let's start out with Nolan Gorman. Man, I was hopeful. I remain kind of hopeful that Nolan Gorman will figure this thing out, but so far it just hasn't happened. He's at a .610 OPS. He's got 19 strikeouts in his first 53 at-bats. In other words, he's striking out a ton. He's not hitting for power again. It looks like the same old that we've seen over the last couple of seasons from Nolan Gorman, not the guy that we saw a few years ago when he hit for all that power and you saw him realize his potential. Do you think this is going to get better, worse, or basically stay the same the rest of the way for Nolan Gorman?
I think it's going to stay about the same for Nolan Gorman. I just don't know what's happened to his power, and I don't know that it's coming back this year. Because like you mentioned last year, he kind of lost it. He ended up with being 10% below league average. He was with a 666 OPS 2 years ago, 13% below league average, 671 OPS. But what's more concerning is the slugging percentage in that time frame. 424, 370 and 25, and right now 321. Don't get me wrong, he's going to get on a little bit of a hot streak, but my question is he going to get, when he gets hot, is he going to hit for power? And he hasn't done that really over the last 2 years. So if he's not going to be able to do that, he's going to look a lot the same as he has so far this year and what he's looked like over the last 2 years. So I say this one's going to stay the same. I just don't know that it's going to click for Nolan Gorman.
I'm going to say it gets better. I'll go ahead and be the bullish one here. It all comes down to how he does against fastballs. Can he crush the fastball or not? Because so far this year, he's not doing a whole lot of damage against them. Last year, he did almost no damage against fastballs. And the year prior, it wasn't great either. But in 2023, when he was good, he was amazing against fastballs. And that is typically the kind of thing that you're going to get in a hitter's count. Can you lay off of that low and away slider? Can you lay off of the heater that's at the very top of the zone that you can't do any damage against and wait for the one that's closer to the middle of the zone that you can actually pull for some real power? I so far, no. The answer is no. But I'm going to hold out hope here. I think there will be a point in time. I don't know when this is coming. I think there will be a point in time, though, where we get a classic Nolan Gorman, goes on an absolute heater for about 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll be on this show, and I bet you by the end of it, Tanner will be saying, maybe this is the time that it actually clicks for Nolan Gorman. Because this is what we do. Gorman goes through dry spells, and then he gets hot, and then he goes through another dry spell, and then it gets hot. It's super annoying to watch. It's frustrating when you're in these modes. And then he carries the offense for 2 to 3 weeks, and you're like, oh man, well, you can't live without that. You've got to keep him around because this is what he can do when he gets hot. And then he goes through another dry spell, and we go back to the same cycle of, oh, you got to get him out of the lineup, get him out, get him out, get him out. If it's going to happen, this is probably a pretty good time for it to happen because you're going up against a couple of teams that do not have great pitching, and we'll get into this more later on, but you're going to see a lot of right-handed pitching, a lot of bad right-handed pitching coming up. That is when Gorman could go on a bit of a heater. So I'll say it gets better, but it has not been fun to watch so far this season. Let's go to the next one, Matthew Liberatore. So far this season, I would say he's the most average of average starters. He has a 4.5 ERA on the season. Is Matthew Liberatore going to get better, worse, or basically stay the same the rest of the way?
I think he's going to be about the same the rest of the way. I don't think it's going to get much better. He doesn't have a ton of swing and miss stuff. I know his stuff was grading up in spring training. I just don't see it. All his stuff looks kind of mediocre to me at best. But the reason I say it's going to be about the same is I think this is kind of where he slots in. You know, he looks more, it's weird to say, he looks more like the second half Libby that we saw last year, but with just sustained velo so far. And I think that's going to be about it. I think we're kind of seeing that the ceiling for Matthew Liberatore is like a number 4 back-end starter for a team that is a lefty that's can eat up a couple of innings when he's right. So far this year, he's not been able to get extremely deep in the games because he's been walking guys. I think he's going to kind of fix that. But I think this is about it. I don't see much more of a ceiling, and I don't think he's going to become much worse of a starter for the St. Louis Cardinals.
I agree with you. I think this is it. And I think it's up to them to determine. Like, I think our evaluation portion of Matthew Liberatore, I'm pretty much set there. I think I kind of know what the player is. Now it's about how do you value that? What is the value of a pitcher that performs the way that Matthew Liberatore has over the last 14 months? And to me, I think it's valuable. I think it's good to have somebody like this that can be a 3 or a 4 starter for you in your rotation. It's not the ultimate upside, but I think the real question for them is going to be, is this more valuable for us to pay through arbitration, or when we start to boost these other starters through our system, is it more valuable for us to cash in on the asset and have somebody else pay for that through arbitration as a potential starter for them as we're continuing to go through a rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it? I think that's going to be the next portion of the Matthew Liberatore conversation. I'll be curious to see which side of that they ultimately land on. The one thing that I would add, I do think his changeup is kind of interesting. He's been throwing it a little bit more this year than he did a year ago. It's become more of a weapon for him, specifically against right-handed hitters. And I'll be curious to see if that allows him to have better numbers against some of those righties that he does see now more often as a starter than he did when he was coming out of the bullpen. So that would be the one other piece to this puzzle that I do find kind of interesting, is what he's able to get out of that changeup the rest of the way.
Yeah, even with that pitch, I don't know, though, that he's going to be able to sustain getting right-handed batters out, you know, unless he really turns to it a lot. But he doesn't miss enough bats. Now, I understand it's 24% whiff rate on that changeup so far when he's thrown it. I wouldn't doubt that we see that number come down as the season goes along. And when you're not missing bats, it's just super hard to really lift your ceiling above what we were just talking about.
All right, continuing along, better, worse, or the same the rest of the way. The defense so far this year, T-Bone, first in Major League Baseball in outs above average. I specifically remember a conversation roughly this time last year. Cardinals, I believe at the time, were like 8-10 overall in terms of their record. They were just slightly below 500. But the pitching had been boosted by the defense. Pitching numbers were solid. They weren't striking anybody out, though, and the defense was number 1 in Major League Baseball. And I think I made reference to it at the time. They were on pace to break the record for outs above average over the course of the single season. I believe that is also the case right now for the St. Louis Cardinals. And they're number 1 in Major League Baseball again. They did not break their record last year, but they were one of the best teams in baseball when it came to their defense overall. They've clearly placed an emphasis on that with Ollie Marmol as the manager. Whether you agree with that decision or not, it doesn't much matter. That's what they're doing. Better or worse or roughly the same the rest of the way for the defense?
I think it's going to be the same. I think it's going to be one of the top defenses in baseball. It's not going to break the record. I won't get out over my skis on that one again. But, I mean, you look at them across the board, you know, I would say maybe their weakest position so far this year defensively has been catcher. And that's kind of weird to say because Pages is viewed as that defensive specialist, but we talked last week about his defense slumping. Burley's looked very good at first base so far this year. Gorman and Urias have been solid defensively at third base. Up the middle, they're extremely strong on the infield with Wynn and Weatherholt. I think Weatherholt could potentially win a Gold Glove this year as a rookie. And then you look in the outfield, and Scott's very good. Jordan Walker is much better than what he was when he first got here to the big leagues. He looks like a average defender in right field with a cannon of an arm. And in left field, I don't think Sajaci or Church or Fermin have looked out of place, and you're only going to get better there defensively when Newpart comes back if he's able to have the same mobility he had early in his career. So I think it stays about the same. I don't know that there's much more of a ceiling to it defensively, and I don't see it getting any worse across the board unless injuries really take hold on this team.
Yeah, I think they basically stay right around here. I agree with you. I think this is a very good defensive team. I've been impressed by what we've seen so far this year from Alec Burleson at first. That's really stood out to me. J.J. Weatherholt has been way better defensively at second than I expected. I didn't really know what he was going to be there, especially as he's transitioning to a new spot, but he's been great. He's a guy who looks completely comfortable there. The play that he made the other day where he's ranging up, I didn't know he had that kind of athleticism, to be totally candid. It's been wildly impressive. So I think they stay roughly the same. Somewhere in that top 3 defensively, I think is roughly where they finish. That would feel about right to me. All right, slug baby slug. This is your favorite mantra. Will it be better, worse, or about the same the rest of the way? Right now, they are at .369 slugging percentage as a team. That is good, if you want to call it that, for 21st in Major League Baseball at this point in the season. Is that going to get better, worse, or roughly the same?
I've been going back and forth on this one, and I think I'm going to say it stays about the same. I don't know that it's going to get worse because my thought process was I was debating between this stays the same or it gets slightly better. And the reason I say that is I know Walker's slugging percentage is going to come down. This guy's not going to have a Mark McGwire season.
We'll see.
But as I say that, I agree with what you said earlier in our open. Herrera's going to start hitting, and he's going to start to bring up that slug. I think Burley's slugging numbers are going to come up a little bit. And I think someone like Wynn can add some doubles in there, along with Weatherholt. I think is going to start to hit some more doubles. So that slug, in theory, should start to come up as that group of players I said, as Walker starts to come down. But I don't know if they'll come up enough to make up for as Walker starts to come down to what would be more of a normal number for what I think he could do this year, which is be like in the high 400s, you know. I think they'll be about the same overall. I think we'll see Walker go cold at some point. The rest of the line will start to slug a little bit, and they'll finish around bottom 10 in baseball in slugging percentage.
Just don't know where the rest of the slugging is coming from. Like, if you see some regression coming here from Jordan Walker, what's boosting it back up? I think some from Herrera. Herrera's is going to go up from here. I don't think he's going to finish the season with what's he at right now? 290 slugging percentage. That's going to go up. It's not going to be that bad. But, I mean, JJ is kind of about where I expect. I think Alec Burleson maybe gets a little better. Gorman eventually will get better. So, I don't think Walker's going to be at 710 the full season. What an absurd start to the season for Jordan Walker. I love it. I think it's going to be about this. 21st, I think, is roughly right. I don't know. Maybe they go up a little bit from 369. Maybe they get closer to like 380, 385, but not a whole lot more. I don't think it's enough to really make a significant difference.
You know what is weird about this? And I don't know. This may just all be based on Jordan Walker when I say this. The weird thing is, it's like I totally agree with what you just said, and I just said at their bottom 10 in slugging percentage. I actually feel much better about the offense.
Oh yeah.
Than the pitching staff moving forward, right? Because I know Walker's probably going to come down, but I also know that you're going to see Herrera hit better. You're going to see Burleson continue to play as he's been. I mean, he's 27% above league average. I still think that there's a chance there's a little bit more slug in Weatherholt's bat this year. I don't know that that's not home run power, but it's more in doubles. Because so far this year, you look at J.J. Weatherholt, and he has 1 double, 4 extra base hits, and 3 of those 4
weird.
are homers.
Surprising.
And I think that's just him kind of learning the way of the big leagues. And I think the more he starts to get that A swing off, he's going to start going more gap to gap. But the offense is what I feel so much better about. And I think it's all just based on Walker. Because if I said at the beginning of the year that we're looking at this team, and I tell you that there were 2 guys hitting, the rotation's been very blah, and the pitching's not been very good, and they're like 500, but 2 guys are hitting, you would have said, oh, great, okay, so Burleson and Herrera are repeating what they did a year ago. And I said, no, my friend, Herrera's actually struggling. It's actually Walker that has broken out. It just changes everything about how you look at the team. And I think Ollie said this right on the Gas House game on KMOX in his last interview of, hey, we're already having conversations about what this means for the future. And it just makes you feel better about what does our lineup look like in 3 years? What could our lineup look like maybe in 5 years? And if this sustains, and they seem to think it will, it changes the outlook of what you're looking at entirely.
So I was about to ask you that as a follow-up question. Are you saying you feel better about the offense today than you expected to compared to the pitching for this year, like the rest of this season, or for the future?
I feel slightly better.
For 3 years down the road.
I feel slightly better about it for this year just because I thought there was truly going to be 2 bats that hit, and now you're talking about potentially 3. But it does make me feel better about the offense moving forward as well. Because as you start to move forward, you look ahead, and now you've at least got a outfielder that it looks like you can put in pen as a, hey, this guy belongs in the way that we're building. Now, I don't know where he settles in the lineup. Is he going to be a 3-4 hole hitter? We'll see long-term moving forward. But I already know, okay, Weatherholt definitely looks like a leadoff hitter long-term. Herrera looks like he's either a 2, 5, or 6, somewhere in that order, probably 5 or 6. Same with Burleson. And now maybe Walker's one of those middle-of-the-order bats that are extremely hard to find on the open market. Yeah, that makes me feel significantly better, and that's on top of, before I even bring up what will Baez potentially look like, what will Reinel Rodriguez look like moving forward. I feel like there's at least potentially now their first answer of hopefully having someone for the middle of the order moving forward.
I'm in full agreement with you there. I would say I feel better about it both for the here and now and for the future. I think Weatherholt's a leadoff hitter, hopefully for you long term, and then you've got Herrera, Burleson, and Walker fitting in somewhere in that 2 to 6 range. Like I feel good about all of that. The reason that I asked it, I'm looking over at the Zips projections right now. They would say that they're more confident in the rotation than they are the offense for the rest of this season. Like they have McGreevy right around a 4 ERA, Liberatore basically what he's been, Palante 4.3, Dustin May right at a 4. And those are like the top 4 starters that are accounted for in this specific projections. That means basically all of them are league average or maybe slightly above. On the offensive side of things, the only guys that the Zips projections have for the rest of the season projected above league average are Herrera, Burleson, Weatherholt, and Gorman. And only 2 of those are more than 5% above league average offensively. So they would, I guess, based upon these projections, it would probably be a slight lean toward the pitching that they feel more confident in than the hitting. I would disagree with these projections. I think that the Cardinals' offense is in a better spot today than where their pitching is at. So let's talk a little bit about that pitching, where they currently stand with their starting rotation, and what is down below. Are there reinforcements that are coming? We know Hunter Dobbins could be one. Is there anybody else right now? We'll talk about that coming up on the other side here on the Redbird Report. All right, so Hunter Dobbins has performed admirably so far in his rehab assignment at AAA, making his way back to the big leagues. He has about 2 weeks left before he's got to be reinserted into this rotation in some capacity. My guess, T-Bone, we've talked about this before, he'll probably be added to the 5-man, not replacing somebody from the 5-man. So you'll have a 6-man rotation, everybody that's already in it, plus Hunter Dobbins for whenever he does return to the big league level. Reason being, that right around that time when he's able to be reinserted into the mix is when they go on that long stretch of games with no off days. So they'll be able to add in an extra rest day for Kyle Leahy, Michael McGreevy going through his first full 162 game schedule at the big league level. It just makes a lot of sense for the way that they've gone about things in the past and how I'm guessing they'll go about it again this year. Beyond him, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about where things stand right now with the rotation. Because, boy, your reinforcements are light. You've got Bruce Zimmerman, who I'm sure you're familiar with, T-Bone.
Never heard of that guy.
He's performing well so far in AAA. He's not exactly a prospect, though. He's probably your 7th starter right now. And the reason for that is because Quinn Matthews has 10 walks in his first 11 innings this year at AAA. Otherwise, stuff looks pretty good, but he's walking the world again. Bryson Motts has 10 walks in his first 12 innings at AAA this season. That could be an adjustment to the big league ball. We see this sometimes. I wouldn't be overly concerned about it, but, for right now, if they needed somebody, it's something that could prevent him from making that jump. Richard Fitz is on the IL. TK Roby's on the IL. Cooper Jerpy's on the IL. Eshawn Henderson is on the IL. That's 4 other options that could have been interesting for you this year as starting rotation possibilities. Well, none of them are currently available for you. And then there's Liam Doyle, who we were wondering, all right, what's the plan going to be for him this year? What's the timeline going to be? I would just say, keep him out of your mind for a little while. Yeah. So far, he's made 2 starts down in AA, and in those 2 starts, he's made it through fewer than 4 innings, and his ERA is not good. It's really bad. It's not worth even looking at right now. Again, not concerned about it. Give it time. He's working on his slider. He needs the secondaries to be good pitches for him. I would rather him execute those and try to figure it out at the AA level than try to just make his way to the big league based upon the success of his fastball. And then he gets here, people lay off of the fastball. He's got to go to the secondaries, and then they crush it at the big league level the way that they are right now down at AA. I'd rather learn this lesson now than wait for him to learn it at the big league level. All right, back to the rotation and the reinforcements. So you've got Hunter Dobbins. T-Bone, anything else down there piquing your interest right now? And how concerned are you about, once again, a seeming lack of depth for their rotation?
I'm concerned about it for the short term. I don't know if it's going to be a conversation by the time we get to July and August. And the reason I say that is, the reason I'm concerned short term is they're basically in the same spot they were in last year, which is they've got 6 starters. Let's cross our fingers, cross our toes, and hope nobody gets hurt. Because once you lose 1, now you're down to 5, and then you're really talking about potentially that Zimmerman cat, which, by the way, is 31 years old and has 28 big league starts. Never knew that.
He's not a prospect.
Not a prospect, not a good pitcher when he was up at the big leagues in years prior. But you don't want to have to go to him, right? And he would be your 7th starter because the fact that they don't want to rush Quinn Matthews and Bryson Motts, who have had their struggles down at AAA. They want those guys marinating, and that's why I say that this is starting to peak, or at least sound a little bit of alarm bells in my head a little bit, is, okay, once Fitz went down to injury, now you're starting to see the starting pitching depth get thinner. And I don't want to see him get to a spot to where it gets so thin they have to call up Motts and Quinn Matthews before they're ready. And that's why I say this is a short-term concern for the St. Louis Cardinals, and it's why they're going to move to a 6-man so they can try and keep these guys healthy again. On top of, once we get to July and August, the hope is that this isn't a conversation anymore, because the hope is Quinn Matthews' command has gotten to a point to where you feel confident that if you want to or if you have to, he can come up and make a couple starts for the big league squad. Same with Bryson Motts. The hope is by July or August, this guy is starting to figure it out at the AAA level with the Major League Baseball that they use down there, and you start to hope, okay, if we have to or we want to, we have him available to us. But in the short term, they are operating or almost in the same spot as they were last season, which is they've got 6 guys, and if they start to lose 2, then it's going to become a real question mark as to what they do.
Agreed. But it's different from last year because last year they were trying to win.
We were a year about runway last year, my friend.
Yeah. Last year they were trying to win. This year they've acknowledged what this is. And so that's why I find this year to be quite different. If they have to go to the scrap heap and they've got to go down and find their J-Hap, they've got to go find their Wade LeBlanc. They've got to find somebody that can help them in the bullpen and be their TJ McFarland. They've got to find just somebody that can throw innings. They're Jared Schuster, who came up for 2 innings and then was thrown right back down, went through waivers, and he's once again back with the AAA roster. Those guys are a dime a dozen, man. You can find them. They're all over the AAA level right now. A lot of them signed minor league deals with major league clubs. They hope that they get through the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, and when they do, they can potentially opt out of their contracts and then go get another opportunity to latch on with an organization elsewhere. The Cardinals can just go find one of those guys. if they end up in a spot where they need a starter. So would this be a concern to me if the Cardinals were all in on, we've got to make it to the playoffs this year? The goal is very clear. We've got to get to 90 wins, and every loss that we have right now is one loss that we can't have toward that 90-win goal. Yes, that would concern the hell out of me. But that's not what this season is about. That's not who this team is. So it doesn't really worry me. It's not something that's really on my radar because you can find the innings. The problem is finding quality innings. And the Cardinals don't have that, but they also don't necessarily need that. I know that sounds like such a loser mentality, but it's the reality of what the 2026 Cardinals campaign really is all about.
Yeah, and that's fair. I guess the reason why it's popping into my head a little bit as a concern, even though I know it's a rebuild year, they don't feel like a rebuilding team yet. And the reason I say that is because of their record. Can change quickly.
That could be a dangerous place to get yourself in.
That can change very quickly. But I do find myself, while watching them, going, this won't sustain, but I kind of find myself hoping it does, right? Just because I've said this before when we had our first episode coming out of spring training. I hate watching rebuilding baseball. I truly do, because it's a lot of what you were just describing, which is whoever this Zimmerman guy is taking them out every fifth day with a 6 ERA. He's not throwing strikes. He's throwing a bunch of balls, and you're watching an offense that can't hit at all, and it just becomes this awful experience to watch. And that's why I guess maybe I see myself kind of, and I know what they are, and I am still saying, like, it is about giving runway, to use their term from last year, for a bunch of these guys, both in the rotation and in the starting nine in the batting order. But I can't help but look at this and still say, man, I really don't want to see them get to a spot where they are desperate for innings and they have to just start pulling guys off of the scrap heap. And I can see the smirk on your face that is just screaming inside your head, Tanner, it's a rebuild. You don't need to worry about this. I don't care. I have that still intrusive thought. Right now, they are still technically trying to win. Even though they are saying they aren't, they technically are right now.
They're still trying to win each game. I believe that to be true. I don't think they will make the same moves to get to that point that they would have 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. I think that's what's really changed, is the motivation to get there is not what it once was. And it's a tough place to be, and I agree with you. And this is why, ideally, they just don't have to go to any of these guys. Ideally, everybody stays healthy. They can go with their same 5 or 6 starters the entirety of the season. We get to see the guys that we wanted to see, and we find out what they're made of. Maybe this rotation is just good enough. I mean, just good enough to sneak through, get to 86 wins, and find a way into the playoffs. Maybe that is what this season is going to be. More likely, though, they're not good enough. They probably deal with some injuries at some point in time. You do see somebody like a Bruce Zimmerman. Maybe they call up Quinn Matthews later on this season, and he gets to go through his lumps at the major league level. And it is what it is, and your offense kind of reverts back to what we all kind of expected it to be, and you win 77 games, lose 85, and you get to the end of the year. JJ had a good season. Walker had a bounce-back campaign. Ivan Herrera looks like a legit middle-of-the-order bat, and Alec Burleson was good. And if those 4 things happen, and Matthew Liberatore looks like a middle-of-the-rotation starter, and McGreevy looks like a legit number 5, and Riley O'Brien looks like a really good closer, guess what? Win. That's a win. That's a successful season in 2026 for the St. Louis Cardinals, and nothing that I just said had anything to do with the overall wins and losses. That's what I'm looking for. So yours is more team-oriented. Mine is very much more on the individual side of things. What are you able to get out of these guys, and what does that mean for your future? Are you building the core nucleus of what the 2027 and 2028 Cardinals are going to be? But I get it. That's not a fun thing to talk about when we're 18 games into the regular season, because we've still got another 144 of these to be able to discuss.
And you just mentioned something that sparked a question in my head of, when we look at the end of the year and we start to ask ourselves, did Walker have a good year? Did Weather have a good year? Are they going to get any answers on the rotation for the long term after this year? Because right now my answer is probably no.
To answer your question, I have to ask a follow-up.
We're not taking questions at this
What
time.
do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is so when you brought up Walker, right? You said, Did Walker have a good year? the answer to if Walker has a good year is yes or no. But on top of that is, okay, well, if it's yes, that probably means you now view him as part of the core.
Sure.
That's kind of what I'm referring to with this pitching staff is, okay, so if we see Libby and we say at the end of the year, did he have a good or bad year? I mean, I don't know what your answer would be if he finishes as a 4. I guess you'd say good year, I guess. Same with McGreevy if he finishes as a 5. But I look at this rotation and I go, it's hard to know that they get any positive answers in the long term from the guys that are at the big league level because I'm not sure they're part of the future. I think those answers come from, did Quinn Matthews finally start throwing strikes? Was Bryson Motts able to adjust to AAA pitching? Does Liam Doyle by the end of year not necessarily get to AAA, but does he figure out AA hitters and start striking them out? Tanner Franklin, same thing.
So you're not going to like my answer because you don't like the style of pitcher. But we have a fundamental disagreement on the back end of a rotation, what you need from them. I think you can get by with McGreevy and Liberatore or 2 other pitchers that are similar to them being in the 3 to 5 range of your rotation. I think what you need is the number 1 and number 2 starters that go out there and give you the ability to strike out a batter per inning and give you the ability for a sub-3 ERA in any given season, right? Like you look at the Boston Red Sox, you find your Garrett Crochet, you find your Tarek Skubal, you find your number 1 starter that very clearly can go up against the ace from another team and gives you a chance. And then your number 2 starter is like Sonny Gray, right? Like that's the kind of rotation that you crave when you are a contender again. If that comes with Michael McGreevy and Matthew Liberatore as your 4-5, I think that's fine. It does put pressure on other elements of your team to be better. There's a sliding scale to all of this. But if those guys are your 4 and 5 and you have this kind of a defense, I think you can get by with that. And I think that's fine. So to answer your question directly, is there a successful season for the rotation? Yes, I'm still evaluating those 2 in particular. Because I think there's a chance McGreevy and Liberatore are part of this rotation when the Cardinals are good again. Beyond that, do I think Palante is? No. Do I think Kiley is? Probably not. Do I think Dustin May is? I'd be surprised by it. So it's really those 2 starters that I think have a realistic chance to be part of the rotation when the Cardinals are contending again. I do not think it's as a top 2 starter, though. I think it's toward the back end of your rotation, and they're guys that are, like, maybe Michael McGreevy never starts a playoff game for you. And he's somebody that's coming out of the pen when you get to the postseason. But I think he's a guy that could help you get there. I think he's a guy that could be in your rotation, eat a bunch of innings, and by the time you get there, maybe he's your swing starter in the postseason.
Yeah, I have a tough time figuring out if they can find success on the rotation for this year because of those guys. Because I agree, it's probably between Libby and McGreevy. I would throw Leahy in there. I think it was worth the experiment to see if he can play up as a starter. So far, the answer looks like no. He's going to have to be more of a bullpen arm. But I don't know if you can have 2 of those guys. Like, I look at some of the best teams across baseball, and their top 4 is missing bats. And that's the thing for me. Like, if you told me, hey, Libby has a 4.5 ERA, I'd say, okay, I can handle that as a number 4 starter. But then when you say, yeah, he's striking out like 5 per 9, that's when I go, I don't know if you can have a 4th starter be that anymore. I think a lot of the 4 stars now are getting better at the swing and miss stuff. They're erratic, yes, but they've got more missing bats. McGreevy can definitely play into being a number 5. I do think there's still a role for a pitch-to-contact pitcher, but I think there's a role for 1. And he's got to eat innings as that 5th starter.
I also don't think this is the strikeout stuff that you're going to see from Liberatore the rest of the way. I don't think he's going to miss a ton of bats, but for his career, even as a starter, he's been closer to 7 per 9 than he is what he's been this year, which is 5 per 9 innings. So I think he's going to get back to something that's a little better than this when it comes to his strikeout stuff. That does not necessarily mean swing and miss. Not all strikeouts come in the form of a swing and a miss. And I think he's going to be more of the, like, he's going to rely a lot on strikeouts looking and like misdirection kind of stuff as a starter. And he's been able to do that in the past. So I think he can continue to be that. All right, let's project forward a little bit. And we typically do this whenever we're done with our show, projecting what the next week is going to look like. I mentioned earlier, you've got 2 series coming up, one against the Houston Astros, another against the Miami Marlins before we have our next episode. All on the road, going up against some pretty poor pitching for the most part. Now, there's a reason for this. The Houston Astros currently have 10 pitchers on the injured list. 10. That is not a misprint. 10 different pitchers, including 7 starters. They have a full rotation plus a couple of backups. Let's put this a different way. They basically have the equivalent to the Cardinals' current starting rotation plus Bruce Zimmerman plus Hunter Dobbins on the injured list. So that would effectively put the rest of the Cardinals' AAA rotation plus some bullpen arms into the rotation right now. That's what the Astros are dealing with. So I say all of that to say this. This should be a good week for the offense. If it's not, it's a bit of a concern. But these are the kinds of pitchers that you should be able to do damage against. T-Bone, even when you look at the Marlins, I know they're known for their pitching development. Dude, they've got like Paddock, Junk, and Meyer, who I think is kind of interesting as a young starter. But 2 of their 3 guys are not exactly standout starters either. My biggest thing that I'm looking for over the next week, I want to see this offense take a step forward. And in particular, we have 5 of the 6 scheduled starters announced so far over the next week. The one other, I don't know what the Astros are doing tomorrow. Maybe it's a bullpen game. I don't think they know what they're doing at this particular moment in time. 4 of those 5 are right-handed starters that the Cardinals are expected to go up against. I think this has a chance to be a really nice week for J.J. Weatherholtz, Alec Burleson, and yes, Nolan Gorman. I think you could get a really nice week here for your left-handed hitters going up against some of these righty starters that you're expected to see. Yeah,
it should be one of those weeks where we look at it and say they had a great offensive showcasing because they're running into these teams at the right time. They're running into the Marlins where you're not going to see Sandy Alcantara. It looks like he's figured it out. You're running into the Astros when they're dealing with these injuries that you have talked about. So it should be one of those where we look at this and say, okay, this offense should take that step forward. And I think they're going to have to because that Astros lineup, they can hit a little bit. They're 3rd in slugging percentage. You know, Alvarez is off to an incredible start, just like Jordan Walker. And the Marlins are also 8th in slugging percentage so far this year. So it's 2 scrappy lineups going against your bad pitching staff. Yeah, the offense is going to have to carry you along in these 2 series. And if they don't hit, then there's a chance that they end up losing both of these series. Yeah, that Houston Astros lineup has been awesome so far this year. And they're missing Pena, by the way. Yep. They're going to be a nightmare for your pitching staff. But the Marlins lineup, I'm a little less high on. I think that you should be able to do okay against them. But the Astros lineup, it's going to have to be a high-scoring series if the Cardinals come away. First to 7 each game. 100%. All right, that is what we have for you guys today. If you have not done so yet, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Check us out over on YouTube. Like and subscribe us over there as well. YouTube.com/101ESPN is a place where you go. We've got Zane back in the fold with us here on the Redbird Report. Appreciate him as always on the video side of things. For Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. We'll talk to you next week here on the Redbird Report.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.